For most of human history, there was no such thing as mental illness. No diagnosis, no psychiatry, no neurology. If someone convulsed, if they spoke in a strange voice, if their personality suddenly changed, there was a single explanation. A demon had entered the body. And for centuries, that explanation shaped how people responded to suffering. Sometimes with prayer, sometimes with ritual, sometimes with fear. Because once a community becomes convinced that a demon is present, compassion can disappear. And history becomes filled with stories of people who are no longer treated as sick, but as something inhabited. Tonight, on the Midnight Drive, the long uncomfortable history with demonic possession. When behavior became a demon. For most of human history, there was no language for mental illness. No psychiatry, no neurology, no psychology. There was only behavior. And when that behavior became frightening enough, people searched for a cause. In medieval Europe, that cause was very often interpreted as demonic possession. The logic was surprisingly straightforward. If a person suddenly began convulsing, screaming, speaking in unfamiliar voices, or just behaving in ways that seemed completely outside their normal personality, then something must have entered their body. The person was no longer themselves. They were inhabited, possessed. The vocabulary surrounding possession is revealing. In early English texts, the word demoniac appears frequently. But it doesn't always mean what we might assume today. In many contexts, it simply means mad. A demoniac was someone who behaved in ways that frightened the people around them. Someone whose actions could not be explained. Someone who appeared to have lost control of their own body or mind. In other words, madness and possession were treated as the same phenomenon. If someone lost control of themselves, then something else must have taken control. This whole idea was deeply tied to the medieval understanding of the human body. The body was believed to be a vessel, a container for the soul. And if that container appeared to malfunction, if the voice changed, if the body convulsed, if the personality shifted, then the explanation was not neurological. It was spiritual. A demon had entered the vessel. Now, this interpretation could be terrifying for both the individual and the community around them, because possession did not simply describe a symptom, it implied a complete loss of agency. The possessed person was no longer considered fully responsible for any of their actions. But they were also no longer entirely themselves. They had become something else. A host. And once the idea of possession enters a community, it rarely remains isolated. It spreads because fear spreads. Interpretation spreads. One person exhibiting strange behavior could quickly lead others to believe they were witnessing something spiritual. Sometimes entire communities became caught in this pattern. One of the most famous examples occurred in the 17th century in Loudun, France. A group of nuns began experiencing convulsions and violent outbursts. They claimed demons were attacking them. Soon, several of the nuns began displaying the same symptoms. The events escalated until the nuns accused a local priest of sending demons to torment them. The priest was eventually executed. Centuries later, historians studying the Loudun possessions suggested a different explanation. Mass hysteria, a psychological phenomenon where fear and expectation spread through a group, producing real physical symptoms. But to the people living through it at the time, the explanation felt obvious. Demons weren't present. Or were they? If demons were present, something had summoned them. Which leads to one of the darkest consequences of possession narratives: the search for blame. We're getting a little darker than usual on the Midnight Drive tonight. If you'd like to join the conversation, please let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, if you'd like to reach out and tell us your stories, or if you'd just like to say hello, go ahead and call our hotline, 402-610-2836. You can also reach out to us via email, theretrowaveradio@gmail.com. Next, we'll be talking about exorcism, fear, and the modern echo. You're listening to the Midnight Drive. And we're back on the Midnight Drive tonight. We're talking about demons. Once possession became accepted as a cause of suffering, the next step seemed inevitable. If a demon could enter the body, then it could also be forced out. The ritual developed to accomplish this was exorcism. The word appears in English texts as early as the 15th century, describing the act of expelling an evil spirit through prayer and command. By the 17th century, the Catholic Church had formalized the process. In 1614, the Church issued a document known as the Ritual Romanum, which described the official procedure for exorcism. The ritual required trained clergy and careful preparation. And interestingly, it included an important caution. Priests were instructed not to assume possession too quickly. They were told to examine whether the behavior might have a natural explanation. Illness, mental disturbance, deception. Even in the 17th century, there was recognition that not every strange event was supernatural. But belief in possession did not disappear as medicine advanced. Instead, the explanation adapted. Modern stories about demons still follow the same structure that appeared in medieval accounts. Something enters, something takes control. The victim begins speaking in a different voice. Knowledge appears that the person should not possess. The body behaves in unnatural ways. And a ritual confrontation becomes necessary to restore order. The setting may change. Instead of monasteries, the stories take place in suburban houses. Instead of medieval priests, the characters might be paranormal investigators. But the narrative remains the same. An invisible force has invaded the human body. Today, demons occupy an enormous space in pop culture. Possessed dolls, haunted houses, Ouija boards, cursed objects. Entire films built around this idea that something unseen can inhabit a human being. It's a story that refuses to disappear because it answers a powerful emotional need. It transforms chaos into conflict. Instead of random suffering, there is an enemy. instead of illness, there's a battle. But historians studying the long arc of possession narratives often point to a quieter, more unsettling conclusion. The explanation of demons may reveal more about human fear than about the supernatural itself. Throughout history, possession accusations often appeared in environments filled with anxiety, religious conflict, social tension, isolation. Moments when communities were already afraid. In those moments, unusual behavior could quickly be interpreted as evidence of something darker. And once the idea of demonic influence takes hold, it shapes how people treat the person experiencing those symptoms. Sometimes with compassion, sometimes with terror. A historian recently suggested that the word possession might not be the most accurate description of what was happening in many of these cases. A more revealing word might be obsession. Not demons entering the body, but human minds searching desperately for meaning. When people encounter behavior they cannot explain, they reach for the tools their culture provides. For medieval Europeans, that tool was the idea of demons. For modern audiences, the explanation might involve psychology or neurology. But the underlying impulse remains the same. Something strange happens. Something frightening. And the human mind refuses to accept that it might not have an answer. That impulse has shaped centuries of stories. Stories of possession. Stories of exorcism. Stories of demons. And perhaps the most unsettling part of that history is this. The experiences themselves may not have changed very much. What has changed is the story we tell ourselves to explain them. I want to thank you so much for taking a ride with us on the Midnight Drive.